Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
And I'm Millicent Walker. First, the headlines. Russia responds to the U.S. announcing medium-range rockets for Ukraine.
The Nigerian mission in Warsaw secures the release of one Nigerian stuck there since leaving the Russian invasion in Ukraine.
Plus, Canada says it will temporarily decriminalize the possession of some illicit drugs in British Columbia.
Again, governor of the Luhansk region in Ukraine, Serhiy Haidai, says Russia is now in control of around 70% of the key eastern city of Severodonetsk, and that Ukrainian troops are now making a tactical withdrawal to defensive positions further to the south. Analysts think that taking the city is a key aim for the Russian invasion, as it would mean that they control almost all of the Luhansk region, one of the two areas that make up the Donbass.
U.S. President Joe Biden says he would not suggest to Kyiv that it surrendered territory likely in the east in order to bring about an end to the war. There have also been multiple allegations of torture inside the Ukrainian city of Kherson, which is currently under Russian occupation. Human rights watchers and the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission inside Ukraine both say that they are investigating similar accounts and are looking at potential war crimes.
Our German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said to Parliament today the country will supply Ukraine with the Iris-T air defense system following pleas from Kyiv and German opposition parties to step up heavy weapons deliveries. Scholz says Germany had been delivering continuously since the beginning of the war, pointing to more than 15 million rounds of ammunition, 100,000 grenades and over 5,000 anti-tank mines sent to Ukraine since Russia invaded the country on February 24. Over the next few weeks, Germany and the Netherlands will also send 12 modern armored howitzer to Ukraine. Responding to critics in his speech to Parliament, Mr. Scholz said his government had responded to the Russian attack with a massive change of policy in Germany by opting to send heavy weapons into a war zone. Ukraine's request for heavy weapons intensified in recent weeks when Moscow turned its fiercest firepower on the country's east after failing to take the capital, Kyiv.
Meanwhile, Russia says the U.S. decision to supply advanced rocket systems and munitions to Ukraine would increase the risk of a direct confrontation between Moscow and NATO. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybkov told Russian state news agency RIA Novosti that Moscow views the U.S. military aid package, which will include the M142 high-mobility artillery rocket system, HIMARS, extremely negatively. The weapons long requested by Ukraine are intended to help it strike enemy forces more precisely from a longer distance. Until now, the U.S. had refused to supply the long-range artillery amid fears that it could be used against targets in Russia.
I think so. Are you going to send long-range rocket systems to Ukraine?
We're not going to send to Ukraine rocket systems that can strike into Russia.
Senator, I know you want Congress to act, but do you believe as president you have a particular responsibility now?
Oh, I know I have to, but there's a Constitution. I can't dictate this stuff. I can do the things I've done, and any executive action I can take, I'll continue to take. But I can't outlaw a weapon. I can't, change the background check. I can't do that. And my whole career I've been doing it.
Just make a noise.
I don't know, but I think there's a realization on the part of rational Republicans, and I consider McConnell a rational Republican, and Cornyn is as well. I think there's a recognition on their part that we can't continue like this. We can't do this. I've got to win. I got the Gold Star pen.
Mr. Biden said the lethal aid would strengthen Kyiv's negotiating position against Russia and make a diplomatic solution more likely. Ukraine's President Zelensky has said his country has no intention of attacking Russia.
clarity on what President Biden meant when he said we're not sending Ukraine rocket systems that could strike into Russia, since even short-range missiles could fly over the border if they're fired nearby? And is the White House concerned that sending a rocket system...
Well, more on that now, as U.S. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said on Tuesday, sending rocket systems to Kyiv is still under consideration by the Biden administration, but Washington will not send long-range rockets for use beyond the battlefield in Ukraine. U.S. officials said President Biden and his national security aides are in the final stages of preparing a new weapons package for Ukraine, with an announcement expected soon, possibly today. We've heard it, haven't we? Ukrainian officials have been asking allies for longer-range systems, including the Multiple Launch Rocket System, or MLRS, that can fire a barrage of rockets hundreds of miles away in the hopes of turning the tide in the 3-month-long war.
Offer some clarity on what President Biden meant when he said we're not sending Ukraine rocket systems that could strike into Russia, since even short-range missiles could fly over the border if they're fired nearby. And is the White House concerned that sending a rocket system could be considered escalatory?
So let me first say that those systems continue to be under consideration, so I don't have anything to preview on anything specific there. But as the president said, we won't be sending long-range rockets for use beyond the battlefield in Ukraine. But right now, I don't have anything to preview for you today.
Secondly, could you...
Joining us now is our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird. It's good to see you. Lots of smiles here in the studio between me and Amarachi. But Maria, if the president had said before he was not sending long-range rockets to Ukraine, why the announcement today?
Well, as you all mentioned earlier, there's a large part of Ukraine that has been occupied by Russia. And I think the real question is, how likely is it that Ukraine will be able to come to an end of this war sometime soon and being able to preserve its sovereignty? I think the U.S. is taking into account that their sovereignty is definitely at risk, and maybe even greater risk than it was just a few weeks ago or days ago, to be very honest. And so at this time, the U.S. is trying to find as many ways as possible to support Ukraine, as they have been a leader in supporting Ukraine. And I can, assure you that it has been many conversations within the White House, especially with those council security measures and those who are focused on international relations and affairs. We also have stated before that President Biden has a long history and a long-standing relationship overseas, and his support of international relations, and that was going to be one of his strong points within his administration. And so we're seeing now that, where he stood in the beginning in late February, he's now just putting forth kind of the necessary artillery and machinery and obviously military aid package that will allow for Ukraine to potentially have a greater chance of sovereignty.
And Russia says it considers the U.S. decision a direct threat. But does the U.S. have buffers in place in case Russia decides to act on its criticism of the United States decision?
I think there are obviously some measures in place to address that. I think the U.S. is very hopeful that it will not get to that point. We know that there has been tension between the U.S. and Russia even prior to this situation with Ukraine in the war with Ukraine and Russia. And so this is something that the U.S. has been very tactical and strategic around, not wanting to engage in a way that could put any type of war between Russia and the U.S. or even any sort of enhanced tension that could lead to the detriment of what I think is the focal point at this time, which is assisting Ukraine in preserving its sovereignty.
Maria, does the United States understand how Ukraine intends to use these weapons? Although the Ukrainian president has said his country has no intentions of attacking Russia, but to Russia, sending long-range rockets and missiles, that's what it means. You're targeting the enemy. The enemy in this instance is Russia.
Yes, the U.S. obviously was very a little slow to state that they would be using these rockets or sending these rockets over. And so the question is what kind of conversations they've had with Ukraine, what is some of the information that has been released to them that will ensure, to your point, that this will not obviously impact any of the neighbors. This will not impact any, as you said, attack on Russia, because then that will be perceived as the U.S. attacking Russia. And I think that's really where the U.S. is trying to stay far away from. Is as we stated before, the president has been very clear that there will not be any military, U.S. sending over any boots on the ground, any military personnel on the ground. And so I think that if these rockets do make it over to Russia, that will signal something very different than what obviously President Biden is trying to signal, which is supporting Ukraine rather than a U.S. war and a U.S. attack on Russia.
Is there any reason why, these countries are acting unilaterally, the U.S. sending weapons to Ukraine, as we've seen in other conflict areas of the U.S. and NATO countries have been involved in? There's been a collective effort, to send weapons and boots on the ground, even though that's not the case in this instance. But why is there no collective responsibility to either send weapons to Ukraine or have a joint response to what Russia is doing in the country?
As we've been watching this whole time, I think the U.S. has been criticized, to be very honest, for some of that. And we know that there has been some collaboration between NATO and various EU allies. And that has been one of the points of consideration. I think one of the points of dialogue over these past few months. And so we've seen some collective measures, obviously coming together to support Ukraine. We know that Germany is speaking out. We know that there are various other, but as you stated before, every country is kind of doing their own individual support of Ukraine. And so I think that as we look to see where the future of this war ends up and the future of the support for Ukraine, will they be able to come together? But again, you can see that every country is supporting Ukraine in a very different way. And as we know right now, the world has been very fragmented. And I think that the U.S. is trying to not only be a leader, but also a leader in bringing together allies and trying to have one collective voice. But the war is moving very fast. And I think that due to the economic impacts, there is a push globally to have an end as quickly as possible.
And Maria, President Biden says he does not intend to oust the Russian president, but at this point, there is no love lost between both leaders. What can you say about the current state of relations between the United States and Russia?
At this time, there's been very minimal conversation. It's just the focus really is on the fact that there's no support from the U.S. for Russia invading Ukraine, and that the support is that Ukraine is able to keep its sovereignty. And that's kind of where it stood. Obviously, there have been sanctions against Russia, trying to find ways. But I think right now it's looking at the lives, the casualties, the humanity concerns that exist. As we've mentioned earlier, as you all mentioned earlier, some of the torture that's happening with Ukrainian people. And obviously so many lives have been lost. So the humanitarian efforts there to support Ukraine, but also noting that this is not only having an economic impact on Russia and Ukraine, but this is having a global impact. And more specifically for President Biden's concerns is an impact on the U.S. economy as well.
And so on the rockets to Ukraine, President Biden has said that the lethal aid will strengthen Kyiv's negotiating position. I mean, for analysts, they would be really wondering why and if, a diplomatic solution would be likely. But can you tell us what perhaps Congress members there, the United States, what they really think about where the war is, this invasion in Ukraine, and the U.S. support, how much support they're giving to the Ukrainians?
Whether or not you sit on the Republican or Democratic side of the fence, I think that the support is for Ukraine. I don't think that there's a question around that. I think the question is what type of aid packages. I think that as we see the months, if we continue on this path for more weeks and months, there will be less support, especially from the Republican Party, because we are seeing such an impact on the U.S. and the global economy. But the real question, as you stated, is some of this, now we're moving into another direction with rockets being provided to Ukraine as a sense of military artillery and military aid packages. And so that, I think, is where we might begin to see some dissension there. You might even see some Democrats that don't support some of that, some of those types of support of Ukraine. And so the question is, are we going to begin to see different types of aid packages? And are we going to continue to be a leader in trying to support Ukraine, or will we begin to see the U.S. tailing back? But I think Congress as a whole is supportive. It's just about where we sit right now with the type of support that we're providing.
Maria Bird in Washington, thank you again for speaking with us, Maria, and keeping us updated. Well, the Kremlin says Russia does not trust Ukrainian promises not to fire U.S.-supplied rockets into Russia. Government spokesperson Dmitry Peskov accuses the United States of adding fuel to fire by supplying advanced rockets to Ukraine and saying it did not trust Kyiv not to fire them into Russia.
He was talking to reporters today where he says, "We believe the U.S. is deliberately pouring fuel on the fire. The U.S. is clearly holding the line that it will fight Russia to the last Ukrainian." Peskov also said that Russia did not rule out a meeting between President Vladimir Putin and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky, but stated that any such talks needed to be prepared in advance and with the goal of signing off on a finalized peace deal.
It is understood U.S. President Joe Biden has agreed, as we've been mentioning, to provide Ukraine with advanced rocket systems that can strike with precision at long-range Russian targets as part of a $700 million weapons package expected to be unveiled today.
Poland's Prime Minister has called for Russian assets to be seized to help fund Ukraine's reconstruction following Moscow's invasion. Speaking at the opening of a new Polish-funded shelter for displaced people in Borodianka in the Kyiv region, Morawiecki said it was not enough to freeze Russian assets held in Western banks and called for them to be confiscated. He also praised the passage of a sixth round of EU sanctions in Russia, saying the measures were needed to cause an economic hit that would leave Russia unable to wage a cruel, barbaric war. Russia calls its operation in Ukraine a special military one. The EU agreed on Tuesday to ban the bulk of imports of Russian crude and oil products in its latest round of sanctions following Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. The housing in Borodianka will be able to accommodate 352 people, women, children, and the elderly who lost their homes due to the invasion. The housing consists of 4 units with 40 modules each. It includes sanitary modules, laundry dining rooms, playrooms, administrative modules. It also has electricity, heat, and it is fully furnished. Borodianka is the first town in the Kyiv region where such housing is introduced because it suffered catastrophic losses amidst fighting in the region early in the conflict. 552 private houses, 24 apartment buildings, 2 schools and all the administrative buildings and partially or fully destroyed, according to Ukrainian authorities. The next container houses are planned to be installed in Bucha, Makariv, Ivankiv, Hostomel and also in the suburbs of Chernihiv.
Coming up after the break on The World Today. 11 people killed as Hurricane Agatha churns near the Mexican state of Oaxaca. Stay with us.
Welcome back. Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson said today the Nordic country would continue its dialogue with Turkey over Ankara's objections concerning its application to join the NATO military alliance. Sweden and Finland both applied to join NATO last month, but their bids have faced unexpected objections from Ankara, which accuses them of being safe havens for Kurdish militants and wants them to reverse an arms exports ban. At the news conference, the UN chief said he was hopeful of a solution to alleviate the impact of the war in Ukraine on global food supplies, but cautioned any agreement was still some way off. With Russia controlling or effectively blockading all Ukrainian Black Sea ports, grain shipments from Ukraine have stalled since the invasion began, while Moscow has blamed Western sanctions for disrupting exports of both grain and fertilizer.
Turkey, we are engaged in a serious dialogue, technically well prepared, with all the relevant parties, in order to find a package deal that will allow for Ukraine to be able to export safely and with security, without undermining its own security, their grain through the Black Sea, and at the same time, for the world to have access without impediments to the Russian production of fertilizers and food that is also essential for global markets in the present situation. And let me remind you that there was a ban of exports until recently. I think that there is progress, but we are not yet there. These are very complex things, and the fact that everything is interlinked makes the negotiation particularly complex. But, as I said to the Security Council, I'm hopeful, but there is a way to go, and we are totally committed to make things happen.
And then we got this from the Nigerian embassy in Poland, where on Monday, May 30, at 7 p.m. local time, the Warsaw mission, led by the ambassador, Christian Ubu himself, secured the release of Mr. Igwe Ikechukwu Christian, a Nigerian refugee that was in Polish detention for 3 months. First, from the left, we'll see the picture in a bit, is the ambassador. In the middle is the released student, and from Ukraine. And to the right will be the consular officer from the embassy. The embassy says, or rather Ambassador Ugu says, they're now left with only 2 Nigerians in the Polish detention, and all efforts are being made to get them out, irrespective of the mistake they made, signing for international protection. Ambassador Christian Ugu joins us now. He is in Warsaw, Poland. Ambassador, thank you for joining us on the program.
Well, thank you for having me.
And we're really grateful, that you have been, very consistent speaking to us about the situation of Nigerians in Poland, and you've been giving us updates. This one you sent late last night. We had to talk about it today. Tell us what the circumstances were that led to this point where Igwe Christian ended up in a detention camp in Poland.
Yeah, thank you very much. The war in Ukraine made many Nigerians and other nationals to leave Ukraine. And Igwe himself, among other nationals, came to Poland. Unfortunately for him, he passed through what is known as green border. That is the border between Belarus and Poland, and he was apprehended by the security guards in Poland. And unfortunately for him, he was not with his passport. He lost it while he was fleeing Ukraine. And when we heard of it, we had to go there to identify the Nigerians that they've locked in the detention. There were so many, about 20 Nigerians, and we were able to identify them. They said no, the Polish guards, that they will have to profile them to know actually that they are coming from Ukraine. We followed it up, and luckily out of 20, they released 13, remaining 6. And among the 6, one of them said that he is not a Nigerian, though his father came from Nigeria, but the mother is from Ghana, and said not ready to claim that he's a Nigerian. Fortunately or unfortunately, he answers a Yoruba name and said he's not. Then the remaining 5, we continue pressing on the Polish authority that these people should be handed over to the embassy so that we evacuate them back to Nigeria. But they said no, that most of them have requested for international protection, that is asylum. Luckily, Igwe himself claimed that he did not sign anything. He didn't endorse their paper. And we followed it up for several months until on 30th, on Monday, when I was told that I should come and take hold of him, that he's now released. And I'm with him now, and I put him in a hotel. I'm ready to look for an admission because he went to Ukraine just last year. He's a first-year student. And he said that he's not ready to come to Nigeria now, that he has suffered. And we're making arrangements if we can get admission for him. And we're following it up. That is the situation about Igwe Ikechukwu Christian.
Ambassador, we just want to understand, why it was a mistake for them to apply for asylum, especially where the Nigerian government was involved already with trying to rehabilitate them just before, they made the decision whether to come back to Nigeria or to stay back in the rest of Europe.
Yeah, I want to say that Nigerian government tried so much. I'm so happy with my country, Nigeria, because immediately the war broke out on 24th of February this year. The government, requested us to make everything possible to see that we evacuate the Nigerians. They make funds available. And these people were arrested, unknowingly to them. And they thought that by asking for asylum, they would be allowed to stay in Poland and continue with their education. That is the mistake they made, not knowing that in Poland, they have stringent laws and regulations. Hardly can you enter into Poland without correct papers, documentations. And that's why some of them, they were deceived, because the Polish guards will bring paper to enable you to endorse, to show that they have, apprehended people entering the country without documents. So they endorsed. They didn't know about it. But that Igwe is a special case. He came through unauthorized border, Belarus. You can understand that previously, before now, Belarus and Poland were having serious problems. So any person coming through Belarus is, taken as a saboteur, and they don't take it easy. That's why he stayed for so long. And coupled with that, he didn't come with any paper. He has no passport, nothing, except that we came and identified as a Nigerian. And with Poland, they have to exhaust every avenue to ensure that whatever you are saying is correct. That's why he stayed for so long.
Indeed, I also remember, we had a list of sort of the borders that some of the Nigerians who were fleeing Ukraine could go through, and this one wasn't really one of them, and perhaps that's why he ended up here. Ambassador, it's also good to hear you say that you're happy with Nigeria, with all that it had done in this to protect its citizens, safely leave the war zone. But it's also interesting that some of the students, the Nigerians, don't also want to come back home. So tell us about the conditions of these Nigerians that were held in detention.
Yeah, thank you very much. First and foremost, I want to tell you that Poland has a large border with Ukraine. In fact, during the evacuation period, we had 8 borders where we receive these refugees. When they came in, in Ukraine, their school fees is very minimal. Like medical students, they pay just about 4,000 euro for, for a session. But here in Poland, it's about 12,000 to 15,000 euro. So you can see many students prefer studying in Ukraine than coming to Poland. But because of this crisis in Ukraine, they decided, a majority of them, to come into Poland. It is on record that about 2,882 Nigerians passed through a Polish border. And when they came in, they wanted to stay here, but they were only given 15 days to remain. And we in the embassy accommodated about 815 Nigerian refugees in hotels. But when the country made available aircraft for them to be evacuated, in fact, almost 4/5 of the Nigerians we kept in hotel, they vanished. Most of them went to Germany, that is very close. And some went to Romania, Hungary, they left. In fact, they thought that Poland would be able to accept them, but unfortunately, the Polish government said they're giving priority to the Ukrainians because the Ukrainians have no other place to go to. But Nigerians, their country is there. We made every effort to ensure that the Polish government, provide admissions for our Nigerian students, but they said no. But recently, they are, accepting some of our pressure on them because I've been able to put one boy, I got admission, one Mohammed Ahmed. I got him admission and he was able to, to be given a temporary residence permit to continue. And others are now applying. I think they've seen the necessity to assist Africans in general because the African ambassadors group will complain bitterly to the government of Poland that Africans should be treated equally with Ukrainian refugees. And I think they are accepting the offer right now.
Ambassador, I wanted to quickly ask, and this is the conditions of, the Nigerians in detention. What are they?
Okay, I went there severally. They're being treated very well. That's why most of them, they don't even want to live there when they hear that they will be evacuated back to Nigeria. They're well treated. But, confinement is a bad something that you don't go out to do one thing or speak with your loved ones. It's a problem. So, luckily for us, they are remaining two. And I assure you, before this month runs out, those two Nigerians will be released. Because I've met with the authority and they've assured me, in fact, on daily basis, I disturb them. Because it seems as if the embassy is not doing anything in the eyes of the Nigerians. My colleagues now that are in other places, they are back home to witness the primary that is going on. But here is the ambassador staying in Poland to make sure that things are going well. There are also many Nigerians that are still hanging around. And if nothing is done, this will add to more problems that the embassy will be having. And these are the things I want to clear. And yesterday, I visited one region, Kelsey region, where I met with the marshal or the mayor there. They promised that if I bring some Nigerians, they will offer them admission in the universities. These are the progress that we are making. And I hope in due time, all these problems we are having will be solved.
Ambassador Christian Ogwu, thank you so much for speaking with us. And we do appreciate the service you're providing to those young Nigerians who are seeking direction at this time. Thank you for being a father to them and for helping the Nigerians that you're doing your job, I suppose. And I'm sure that you can still catch up with some parts before the elections. Thank you again for joining us on the program.
Oh, thank you for having me.
We're on to Mexico now, where 11 people have been killed, more than 20 still missing, after Hurricane Agatha struck Oaxaca State. The state's governor made this known. Agatha made landfall on Monday as a Category 2 hurricane, the strongest to hit Mexico's Pacific coast in the month of May since records began in 1949.
Heavy rain brought by Agatha triggered landslides and flash flooding. Most of the victims were swept away by rivers or buried in mudslides. Agatha arrived on Mexico's coast near Puerto Angel with wind gusts of up to 169 kilometers per hour, but lost strength as it moved inland.
But torrential rains caused rivers to overflow, mountainsides to give way. According to Oaxaca Governor Alejandro Murat, at least 5 people were swept away by rivers. Villages in the mountains are amongst those worst hit. The mayor of Santa Catarina do Huagana says that there is much destruction across the state and across the region. She said they've been cut off power, there's no power, the roads are damaged, and several houses have been destroyed.
Aquí es el corredor donde tenía su pequeña cocina mi señora. Y pues de la parte de adentro pues es el.
And at least 4 people have been killed and 14 others injured after a 6.1 magnitude earthquake rattled Lushan County of Ya'an City, southwest China's Sichuan province at 1700 Wednesday Beijing time, according to China's Earthquake Network Center. Now, as of 1940, 4 deaths, 14 injured were reported in Guangdong County. Now, the injured were sent to hospital for treatment. The epicenter, with a depth of 17 kilometers, was at 30.37 degrees north latitude and 102.94 degrees east longitude. The epicenter was 12 kilometers from the county, 38 kilometers from Tiquan County, and 41 from Yan City, and 113 kilometers from Chengdu City.
China's President Xi Jinping has sent a message of condolence to Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro over severe floods that caused heavy casualties in the country. In his message, President Xi said he was shocked to learn of the major floods in northeastern Brazil, which had caused heavy casualties and property losses. The Chinese president offered his deep condolences to the victims and sincere sympathies to the bereaved families, as well as to people in the disaster-hit areas. At least 100 people were killed in the mudslides and the floods triggered by heavy rains in Brazil over the weekend.
Well, staying with the weather, residents woke up to a winter wonderland as part of Australia's east coast heralded in the new season with frosty conditions. A cold snap has brought strong winds and icy conditions to parts of the country over the past few days, with schools shut down, state emergency services responding to over 1,000 calls for help. Sydney resident Julie Gunner made the 3-hour drive to Oberon to see the magical snowfall. According to the Bureau of Meteorology, the heavy snowfall in some areas has allowed at least one ski resort to open a week earlier than anticipated, with the Perisher Ski Resort in New South Wales announcing it would open June the 4th, that's Saturday. Conditions are expected to ease by Friday. And still ahead on the program. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for many Britons excited about the long weekend celebration of the Queen's Jubilee. Please stay with us.
Welcome back to The World Today. The United Nations mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, says Bangladesh Marine Unit has received a brand new accommodation barge to aid its operations in the country. According to the officials, it's an essential infrastructural upgrade for increased operational readiness.
The River Nile waterway is critical for the UN mission in South Sudan from Bangladesh, stationed at Mangala port, to supply essential rations, fuel and equipment to their counterparts in Malakal, Upper Nile.
This logistic operation is called Operation Lifeline. When I say lifeline, it really means that in literal meaning. It's a lifeline for the mission because we carry all the logistic goods, especially which are the life-saving one, like fuel, like ration and all our stores, to the areas where the roads communication are not there. And we use this river route to do that. So this is very important for us.
Peacekeepers traverse 1,000 kilometers by water, crossing 42 checkpoints, carrying enormous amounts of supplies that enable the UNMISS presence in Malakal sustain itself for more than 3 months at a stretch.
Well, I think we have to take a step back and recognize that in a country which is as challenged as this one is for road transport, the river is a very accessible, efficient, and cheap form of transport. And with a view to exploiting that, it raises the question of having the necessary force protection to guard our patrols. And that responsibility has fallen upon the Bangladesh Marine Unit.
The perils of the water are not the only challenge that 7 rotations of Bangladeshi peacekeepers have faced. Their living conditions were extremely dire. They were sleeping in tents above fuel containers, an arrangement that brought with it strict security restrictions.
We are here today because the Marine Unit has had a significant upgrade in its accommodation from a situation where really the accommodation was substandard, and we've finally been able to address it. We had the opportunity to engage with the unit to find out what exactly they do, not only what they do on a day-by-day basis, but where it fits in to the overall operation.
They are bringing a lot of advantages to this mission. Particularly, you know that it's not very easy to transport things here given the situation that mobility is restricted, the weather is the challenge, and then there's no much infrastructure. So taking the advantage of the River Nile, and they are carrying a lot of goods, which is quite economical and not that time consuming that we talk about. Within 12 to 15 days, the resources are available there in the upper Nile area. And they're not doing it for the first time. They have done it 52 times ever since they are deployed here. And this is the 53rd one where they are going to take the new accommodation barge that they have.
I think there's an increasing appreciation of the need for the mission to be more agile and mobile and to cover more ground in its operations. And of course, access through the river gives us another arrow in our quiver, so to speak. But I'm also conscious that there could be elections here in the near future or near to medium-term future, which will impose quite significant responsibilities to look after the logistics. Elections are logistics heavy, and that will certainly implicate our riverine elements as well as our road transport elements.
The new accommodation barge will provide a much-needed respite to these peacekeepers as they carry out their duties.
Canada has announced it will temporarily decriminalize the possession of small amounts of some illicit drugs in British Columbia, BC. The province asked for the criminal code exemption after overdoses claimed more than 2,000 lives in BC last year. This time-limited 3-year trial is the first of its kind in Canada. Adults will be allowed to possess a combined total of 2.5 grams of opioids, cocaine, methamphetamine, and MDMA. While those substances will remain illegal, adults found in possession for personal use will not be arrested, charged, or have their drugs seized. Instead, they will be offered information on available health and social services. In its request to the federal government last year, British Columbia said it asked for the drug laws exemption in order to remove the shame that often prevents people from reaching out for life-saving help. The Federal Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Carolyn Bennett, said on Tuesday that for too many years, the ideological opposition to harm reduction has cost lives.
Investigators in the U.S. state of Texas say a teacher did not, as previously stated, leave a door propped open with a rock during the massacre at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde last week, but closed it before the attacks began, only for the door not to automatically lock. The gunman used the door to get inside, where he killed 19 students and 2 teachers. The finding released by Texas Department of Public Safety contradicts an earlier account in which they said a teacher had propped the door open shortly before Salvador Ramos entered the building. Law enforcement did not intervene in the attack for approximately 1 hour and 20 minutes. Travis Considine, Chief Communications Officer for the department, said investigators had determined that the teacher, who has not been identified, propped the door open with a rock, but removed it, closing the door when she ran back inside to get her phone and call 911 after the gunman crashed his truck on campus on the elementary school campus. The door, he said, was designed to lock when shut, but did not. According to the chief, we did verify she closed the door. The door did not lock. We know that much. And now investigators are looking into why it did not lock.
Away from the US, the first flight carrying asylum seekers from Britain to Rwanda is expected to take place in 2 weeks. That's under a plan announced by Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government in April that has drawn criticisms from both inside and outside his Conservative Party, as well as many charities. The UK's Home Office said yesterday that an initial group of migrants had started to receive formal letters telling them they are being sent to Rwanda to, quote, rebuild their lives in safety. In a statement, Home Secretary Priti Patel said the first flight is expected to take place on June 14. The British government says the scheme is designed to break people smuggling networks. Last year, 28,000 people made the crossing from mainland Europe to the UK, mostly in small boats.
Saying it's work.
Well, it's one day to the celebrations of the Queen's birthday, the Queen's Jubilee, I should say, in the UK. And royal fans are all camped out along the Mall in London today to secure a spot to watch all of the celebrations starting tomorrow. Britain will mark Queen Elizabeth's record-breaking 70 years on the throne this week with 4 days of celebrations, ranging from military parades and a church service to street parties and a pop concert outside Buckingham Palace. The 96-year-old monarch marked 7 decades on the throne in February, and 2 public holidays have been set aside to create a 4-day weekend for nationwide events commemorating her reign from June 2nd to the 5th. Spectators set up tents behind barricades lining the Mall, where the Queen's birthday parade will pass by tomorrow, followed by a pageant on Sunday.
Also with the Jubilee mood as Britain is set to celebrate the Platinum Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II with royal pageantry. Some are calling it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She is the world's 3rd longest-serving monarch in recorded history, the longest of any British or female sovereign on the throne since 1952, a time closer to the Statue of Liberty's completion than it is to the present day. She has become an unshakable emblem of British soft power and perhaps the nation's most recognizable celebrity around the world.
I understand she won't be able to attend these celebrations herself.
I wanted to trim up and decorate, and I thought let's just go overboard. It only happens once in a lifetime, so to celebrate properly and get myself noticed by my friends at home.
Well, we've got everything. We've got outfits to dress up in for now, for tomorrow, a different outfit for the pageant to fit in with the eras, and we've got afternoon tea and drinks and cocktails for later.
I just love the Queen. She served so selflessly for the last 70 years, dedicated her life to the country. I'm so grateful to her for that and so proud of her, so just wanted to come over and say thank you, really. So this is me just saying thank you to her for her service.
Finally on the program, the Santa Claus theme park in his hometown in the snowy north is ready to stand down its elves and revert to its original function, an emergency bomb shelter in case of attack at the time of expansion of Russian military threat. Tens of thousands of people visit the Santa Park in Rovaniemi city in Lapland each year to meet Santa and have their photograph taken with him. The cavernous underground corridors are replete with Santa's post office, elf school, handicraft shops, Christmas trees, and of course the reindeer.
This is supposed to be a happy story, Marachi. I'm not so sure anymore. Its main purpose, however, is far from festive. Carved into a hill some 50 meters, this shelter is equipped to withstand bombings or a chemical or nuclear attack and could house 3,600 people. It has camping beds, first aid kits, and even equipment to dig a tunnel back to the surface in case the construction collapses. A separate well provides water, although people would need to bring their own food.
Well, most of the Santa-themed items would have to be cleared out in case the shelter needs to be used. Some toys from the gift shop will be kept for children seeking safety there. The Santa shelter is just one of about 50,000 built after the Nordic country experienced 2 wars with the Soviet Union during World War II. And normally housing swimming pools, sports centers, or parking garages. During peacetime, this vast network has become part of everyday life across Finland.
Tiukemmat sitä löysettiin nyt, mutta periaatteessa voisi sanoa, että jokaisessa kerrostalossa on väestönsuoja.
Pretty interesting. They are expecting an attack from Russia and preparing for that.
Indeed, it's also an amazing structure.
It is. It must have taken a lot of time to build. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
I'm Melissa Ntonwoka. Have a good evening.